sustains, and explains it. In the ritual of the lodge, we see man, hoodwinked by the senses, slowly groping his way out of darkness, seeking the light of morality and reason. But he does so by the aid of inspiration from above, else he would live untroubled by a spark. Some deep need, some dim desire brought him to the door of the lodge, in quest of a better life and a clearer vision. Vague gleams, impulses, intimations reached him in the night of nature, and he set forth and finding a friendly hand to help knocked at the door of the house of light. As an apprentice a man is, symbolically, in a crude, natural state, his divine life covered and ruled by his earthly nature. As a fellowcraft he has made one step toward liberty and light, and the nobler elements in him are struggling to rise above and control his lower, lesser nature. In the sublime degree of a master mason, far more sublime than we yet realize, by human love, by the discipline of tragedy, and still, more by divine help the divine in him has subjugated the earthly, and he stands forth strong, free, and fearless, ready to raise stone upon stone until naught is wanting. If we examine with care the relative positions of the square and compasses as he advanced through the degrees, we learn a parable and a prophecy of what the compasses mean in the life of a mason. Here, too, we learn what the old philosopher of China meant when he urged officers of the government to apply the compasses, since only men who have mastered themselves can really lead or rule others. Let us now study the compasses apart from the square, and try to discover what they have to teach us. There is no more practical lesson in Masonry, and it behooves us to learn it and lay it to heart. As the light of the Holy Bible reveals our relation and duty to God, and the square instructs us in our duties to our brother and neighbor, so the compasses teach us the obligation which we owe to ourselves. What that obligation is needs to be made plain. It is the primary, imperative, everyday duty of circumscribing his passions, and keeping his desires within due bounds. As most excellent King Solomon said long ago, better is he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. In short, it is the old triad, without which character loses its symmetry, and life may easily end in chaos and confusion. It has been put in many ways, but never better than in the three great words: self-knowledge, self-reverence, self-control, and we cannot lose any one of the three and keep the other two. To know ourselves, our strength, our weakness, our limitations, is the first principle of wisdom, and a security against many a pitfall and blunder. Lacking such knowledge, or disregarding it, a man goes too far, loses control of himself, and by the very fact loses, in some measure, the self-respect which is the cornerstone of a character. If he loses respect for himself, he does not long keep his respect for others, and goes down the road to destruction, like a star out of orbit, or a car into the ditch. The old Greeks put the same truth into a trinity of maxims. Know thyself. In nothing too much. Think as a mortal, and it made them masters of the art of life and the life of art. Hence their wise doctrine of the limit, as a basic idea both of life and of thought, and their worship of the God abounds, of which the compasses are a symbol. It is the wonder of our human life that we belong to the limited and to the unlimited. Hemmed in, hedged about, restricted, we long for a liberty without rule or limit. Yet limitless liberty is anarchy and slavery. As in the great word of Burke, it is ordained in the eternal constitution of things, that a man of intemperate passions cannot be free, his passions forge their fetters. Liberty rests upon law. The wise man is he who takes full account of both, who knows how, at all points, to qualify the one by the other, as the compasses, if he uses them aright, will teach him how to do. Much of our life is ruled for us whether we will or not. The laws of nature throw about us their restraining bands, and there is no place where their writ does not run. The laws of the land make us aware that our liberty is limited by the equal rights and liberties of others. Our neighbor, too, if we fail to act toward him squarely, may be trusted to look after his own rights. Custom, habit and the pressure of public opinion are impalpable restraining forces which we dare not altogether defy. These are so many roads from which our passions and appetites stray at our peril. But there are other regions of life where personality has free play, and they are the places where most of our joy and sorrow he. It is in the realm of desire, emotion, motive, in the inner life where we are freest and most alone, that we need a wise and faithful use of the compasses. How to use the compasses is one of the finest of all arts, asking for the highest skill of a master mason. If he is properly instructed, he will rest one point on the innermost center of his being, and with the other draw a circle beyond which he will not go until he is ready and able to go farther. Against the littleness of his knowledge, he will set the depth of his desire to know, against the brevity of his earthly life the reach of his spiritual hope. Within a wise limit, he will live and labor and grow, and when he reaches the outer rim of the circle he will draw another, and attain to a full-orbed life, balanced, beautiful, and finely poised. No wise man dare forget the maxim, in nothing too much, for there are situations where a word too much, a step too far, means disaster. If he has a quick tongue, a hot temper, a dark mood, he will apply the compasses, shut his weakness within the circle of his strength, and control it. Strangely enough, even a virtue, if unrestrained and left to itself, may actually become a vice. Praise, if pushed too far, becomes flattery. Love often ends in a soft sentimentalism, flabby and foolish. Faith, if carried to the extreme by the will to believe, ends in overbelief and superstition. It is the compasses that help us to keep our balance, in obedience to the other Greek maxim. Think as a mortal, that is, remember the limits of human thought. An old mystic said that God is a circle whose center is everywhere, and its circumference nowhere. But such an idea is all a blur. Our minds can neither grasp nor hold it. Even in our thought about God, we must draw a circle enclosing so much of his nature as we can grasp and realize, enlarging the circle as our experience and thought and vision expands. Many a man loses all truth in his impatient effort to reach final truth. It is the man who fancies that he has found the only truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and who seeks to impose his dogma upon others, who becomes the bigot, the fanatic, the persecutor. Here, too, we must apply the compasses, if we would have our faith fulfill itself in fellowship. Now we know in part, a small part, it may be, but it is real as far as it goes, through it be as one who sees in a glass darkly. The promise is that if we are worthy and well qualified, we shall see God face to face and know even as we are known. But God is so great, so far beyond my mind and yours, that if we are to know him at all truly, we must know him together, in fellowship and fraternity. And so the poet Mason was right when he wrote, he drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win, we drew a circle that took him in. Brothers and Builders by Joseph Fort Newton. Chapter 5. The Level and the Plumb, brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library. Read by Kwame. Like the square and the compasses, the level and the plumb are nearly always united in our ritual. They really belong together, as much in moral teaching as in practical building. The one is used to lay horizontals, the other to try perpendiculars, and their use suggests their symbolism. By reason of their use, both are special working tools of the fellowcraft, along with the square, and they are also worn as jewels by two of the principal officers of the lodge. Among the craft masons of olden time, the actual work of building was done by fellowcrafts, using materials gathered and rough-hewn by apprentices, all working under the guidance of the master. In our symbolism, as the apprentice is youth, so the fellowcraft is manhood, the time when the actual work of life must be done on the level, by the plumb and square. Next to the square and compasses, the level and plumb are among the noblest and simplest symbols of the craft, and their meaning is so plain that it hardly needs to be pointed out. Yet they are so important, in use and meaning, that they might almost be numbered among the lesser lights of the lodge. 1. The level. The level, so the newly made mason is taught, is for the purpose of proving horizontals. An English writer finds a lesson in the structure of the level, in the fact that we know that a surface is level when the fluid is poised and at rest. Greater than from the use of the level, he bids us seek to attain a peaceful, balanced poise of mind, undisturbed by the passions which upset and sway us one way or the other. It is a counsel of perfection, he admits, but he insists that one of the best services of Masonry is to keep before us high ideals, and, what is more, a constantly receding ideal, otherwise we should tire of it. Of course, the great meaning of the level is that it teaches equality, and that is a truth that needs to be carefully understood. There is no little confusion of mind about it. Our Declaration of American Independence tells us that all men are created equal, but not many have tried to think out what the words really mean. With most of us it is a vague sentiment, a glittering generality born of the fact that all are made of the same dust, are sharers of the common human lot, moved by the same great faith and fears, hopes and loves, walking on the level of time until death, by its grim democracy, erases all distinctions and reduces all to the same level. Anyone who faces the facts knows well enough that all men are not equal, either by nature or by grace. Our humanity resembles the surface of the natural world in its hills and valleys. Men are very unequal in physical power, in mental ability, in moral quality. No two men are equal, no two are alike. One man towers above his fellows, as a mountain above the hills. Some can do what others can never do. Some have 5 talents, some 2, and some but 1. A genius can do with effortless ease what it is futile for others to attempt, and a poet may be unequal to a hod carrier in strength and sagacity. When there is inequality of gift, it is idle to talk of equality of opportunity, no matter how fine the phrase may sound. It does not exist. By no glib theory can humanity be reduced to a dead level. The iron wrinkles of fact are stubborn realities. Manifestly, it is better to have it so, because it would make a dull world if all men were equal in a literal sense. As it is, wherein one lacks another excels, and men are drawn together by the fact that they are unequal and unlike. The world has different tasks demanding different powers: brains to devise, seers to see, hands to execute, prophets to lead. We need poets to inspire, scientists to teach, pioneers to blaze the path into new lands. No doubt this was what Goethe meant when he said that it takes all men to make one man, and the work of each is the glory of all. What, then, is the equality of which the level is the symbol? Clearly, it is not identity or even similarity of gift and endowment. No, it is something better. It is the equal right of each man to the full use and development of such power as he has, whatever it may be, unhindered by injustice or oppression. As our Declaration of Independence puts it, every man has an equal and inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, with due regard for the rights of others in the same quest. Or, as a famous slogan summed it up, equal rights for all, special privileges to none. That is to say, before the law, every man has an equal right to equal justice, as before God, in whose presence all men are one in their littleness. Each receives equally and impartially the blessing of the eternal love, even as the sun shines and the rain falls on all with equal benediction. Albert Pike, and with him many others, have gone so far as to say that Masonry was the first apostle of equality in the true sense. One thing we do know: Freemasonry presided over the birth of our republic, and by the skill of its leaders wrote its basic truth, of which the level is the symbol, into the organic law of this land. The war for independence, and the fight for constitutional liberty, might have had another issue but for the fact that our leaders were held together by a mystic tie of obligation, vowed to the service of the rights of man. Even Thomas Paine, who was not a Mason, wrote an essay in honor of an order which stood for government without tyranny and religion without superstition, 2 principles which belong together, like the level and the plumb. Thus, by all that is sacred both in our country and our craft, we are pledged to guard, defend, and practice the truth taught by the level. But it is in the free and friendly air of a lodge of Masons, about an altar of obligation and prayer, that the principle of equality finds its most perfect and beautiful expression. There, upon the level, the symbol of equality, rich and poor, high and low, prince and plain citizen, men of diverse creeds, parties, interests, and occupations, meet in mutual respect and real regard, forgetting all differences of rank and station, and united for the highest good of all. We meet upon the level and part upon the square. Titles, ranks, riches, do not pass the inner guard, and the humblest brother is held in sacred regard, equally with the brother who has attained the highest round of the wheel of fortune. Every man in the lodge is equally concerned in the building of the temple, and each has his work to do. Because the task demands different gifts and powers, all are equally necessary to the work: the architect who draws the plans, the apprentice who carries stones or shapes them with chisel and gavel, the fellowcraft who polishes and deposits them in the wall, and the officers who marshal the workmen, guide their labor, and pay their wages. Everyone is equal to every other so long as he does good work, true work, square work. None but is necessary to the erection of the edifice. None but receives the honor of the craft, and all together know the joy of seeing the temple slowly rising in the midst of their labors. Thus Masonry lifts men to a high level, making each a fellow worker in a great enterprise, and if it is the best brotherhood, it is because it is a brotherhood of the best. 2. The plumb. The plumb is a symbol so simple that it needs no exposition. As the level teaches unity in diversity and equality in difference, so the plumb is a symbol of rectitude of conduct, integrity of life, and that uprightness of moral character which makes a good and just man. In the art of building, accuracy is integrity, and if a wall be not exactly perpendicular, as tested by the plumb line, it is weak and may fall, or else endanger the strength and stability of the whole. Just so, though we meet upon the level, we must each build an upright character, by the test of the plumb, or we weaken the fraternity we seek to serve and imperil its strength and standing in the community. As a workman dare not deviate by the breadth of a hair to the right or to the left if his wall is to be strong and his arch stable, so Masons must walk erect and live upright lives. What is meant by an upright life each of us knows, but it has never been better described than in the 15th Psalm, which may be called the religion of a gentleman in the design upon the trestleboard of every Mason. Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly, and worketh righteousness, and speaketh the truth in his heart. He that backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doth evil to his neighbor, nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbor. In whose eyes a vile person is condemned, but he honoureth them that fear the Lord. He that sweareth to his own hurt, and changeth not. He that putteth not out his money to usury, nor taketh reward against the innocent. He that doth these things shall never be moved. What is true of a man is equally true of a nation. The strength of a nation is its integrity, and no nation is stronger than the moral quality of the men who are citizens. Always it comes back at last to the individual, who is a living stone in the wall of society and the state, making it strong or weak. By every act of injustice, by every lack of integrity, we weaken society and imperil the security and sanctity of the common life. By every noble act, we make all sacred things more sacred and secure for ourselves and for those who come after us. The prophet Amos has a thrilling passage in which he lets us see how God tested the people which were of old by the plumb line, and by the same test we are tried. Thus he showed me, and, behold, the Lord stood upon a wall made by plumb line, with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord said unto me, Amos, what seest thou? And I said, a plumb line. Then said the Lord, behold, I will set a plumb line in the midst of my people of Israel. I will not again pass them by any more. Brothers and Builders by Joseph Fort Newton Chapter 6. The Master's Piece brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library. Read by Kwame. In the olden time it was no easy matter for a man to become a Freemason. He had to win the right by hard work, technical skill, and personal worth. Then, as now, he had to prove himself a freeman of lawful age and legitimate birth, of sound body and good repute, to be eligible at all. Also, he had to bind himself to serve under rigid rules for 7 years, his service being at once a test of his character and a training for his work. If he proved incompetent or unworthy, he was sent away. In all operative lodges of the Middle Ages, as in the guilds of skilled artisans of the same period, young men entered as apprentices, vowing absolute obedience, for the lodge was a school of the 7 sciences, as well as of the art of building. At first the apprentice was little more than a servant, doing the most menial work, and if he proved himself trustworthy and proficient his wages were increased. But the rules were never relaxed, except at Christmas time, as the old charges tell us, when there was a period of freedom duly celebrated with feast and frolic. The rules by which an apprentice pledged himself to live, as we find them recorded in the old charges, were very strict. He had first to confess his faith in God, vowing to honor the church, the state and the master under whom he served, agreeing not to absent himself from the service of the order save with the license of the master. He must be honest and upright, faithful in keeping the secrets of the craft and the confidence of his fellows. He must not only be chaste, but must not marry or contract himself to any woman during the term of his apprenticeship. He must be obedient to the master without argument or murmuring, respectful to all Freemasons, avoiding uncivil speech, free from slander and dispute. He must not frequent any tavern or alehouse, except it be upon an errand of the master, or with his consent. Such was the severe rule under which an apprentice learned the art and secrets of the craft. After 7 years of study and discipline, either in the lodge or at the annual assembly, where awards were usually made, he presented his masterpiece, some bit of stone or metal carefully carved, for the inspection of the master, saving, behold my experience. By which he meant the sum of his experiments. He had spoiled many a hit of stone. He had dulled the edge of many a tool. He had spent laborious nights and days, and the whole was in that tiny bit of work. His masterpiece was carefully examined by the masters assembled, and if it was approved he was made a master mason, entitled to take his kit of tools and go out as a workman, a master and fellow of his craft. Not, however, until he had selected a mark by which his work could be identified, and renewed his vows to the order in which he was now a fellow. The old order was first apprentice, then master, then fellow, mastership being, in the early time, not a degree conferred, but a reward of skill as a workman and of merit as a man. The reversal of the order today is due, no doubt, to the custom of the German guilds, where a fellow craft was required to serve 2 additional years as a journeyman before becoming a master. No such custom was known in England. Indeed, The reverse was true, and it was the apprentice who prepared his masterpiece, and if it was accepted, he became a master. Having won his mastership, he was entitled to become a fellow, that is, a peer and fellow of the craft which hitherto he had only served. Hence, all through the old charges, the order is masters and fellows, but there are signs to show that a distinction was made according to ability and skill. For example, in the Matthew Cook MS. We read that it had been ordained that they who were passing of cunning should be passing honored, and those less skilled were commanded to call the more skilled masters. Then it is added, they that were less of wit should not be called servant nor subject, but fellow, for nobility of their gentle blood. After this manner, our ancient brethren faced the fact of human inequality of ability and initiative. Those who were of greater skill held a higher position and were called masters, while the masses of the craft were called fellows. A further distinction must be made between a master and a master of the work, now represented by the master of the lodge. Between a master and the master of the work, there was no difference, of course, except an accidental one. They were both masters and fellows. Any master could become a master of the work provided he was of sufficient skill and had the fortune to be chosen as such either by the employer or the lodge, or both. What rite or ritual, if any, accompanied the making of a master in the old operative lodges is still a matter of discussion. In an age devoted to ceremonial, it is hard to imagine such an important event without its appropriate ceremony, but the details are obscure. But this is plain enough. All the materials out of which the degrees were later developed existed, if not in drama, at least in legend. Elaborate drama would not be necessary in an operative lodge. Even today, much of what is acted out in an American lodge is merely recited in an English lodge. Students seem pretty well agreed that from a very early time there were two ceremonies, or degrees, although, no doubt, in a much less elaborate form than now practiced. As the order, after the close of the cathedral building period, passed into its speculative character, there would naturally be many changes and much that was routine in an operative lodge became ritual in a speculative lodge. This is not the time to discuss the origin and development of the third degree, except to say that those who imagine that it was an invention fabricated by Anderson and others at the time of the revival of Masonry, in 1717, are clearly wrong. Such a degree could have been invented by anyone familiar with the ancient mystery religions, but it could never have been imposed upon the craft unless it harmonized with some previous ceremony, or, at least, with ideas, traditions, and legends familiar and common to the members of the craft. That such ideas and traditions did exist in the craft we have ample evidence. Long before 1717, we hear hints of the master's part, and those hints increase as the office of master of the work lost its practical aspect after the cathedral building period. What was the master's part? Unfortunately, we cannot discuss it in print, but nothing is plainer than that we do not have to go outside of Masonry itself to find the materials out of which all three degrees, as they now exist, were developed. Masonry was not invented, it grew. Today it unfolds its wise and good and beautiful truth in three noble and impressive degrees, and no man can take them to heart and not be ennobled and enriched by their dignity and beauty. The first lays emphasis upon that fundamental righteousness without which a man is not a man, but a medley of warring passions, that purification of heart which is the basis alike of life and religion. The second lays stress upon the culture of the mind, the training of its faculties in the quest of knowledge, without which man remains a child. The third seeks to initiate us, symbolically, into the eternal life, making us victors over death before it arrives. The first is the degree of youth, the second the degree of manhood, the third the consolation and conquest of old age, when the evening shadows fall and the eternal world and its unknown adventure draw near. What, then, for each of us today, is meant by the master's piece? Is it simply a quaint custom handed down from our ancient brethren, in which we learn how an apprentice was made a master of his craft? It is that indeed, but much more. Unless we have eyes to see a double meaning everywhere in Masonry, a moral application and a spiritual suggestion, we see little or nothing. But if we have eyes to see it is always a parable, an allegory, a symbol, and the master's piece of olden time becomes an emblem of that upon which every man is working all the time and everywhere, whether he is aware of it or not, his character, his personality, by which he will be tested and tried at last. Character, as the word means, is something carved, something wrought out of the raw stuff and hard material of life. All we do, all we think, goes into the making of it. Every passion, every aspiration has to do with it. If we are selfish, it is ugly. If we are hateful, it is hideous. William James went so far as to say that just as the stubs remain in the checkbook, to register the transaction when the check is removed, so every mental act, every deed becomes a part of our being and character. Such a fact makes a man ponder and consider what he is making out of his life, and what it will look like at the end. Like the Masons of old, apprenticed in the school of life, we work for a penny a day. We never receive a large sum all at once, but the little reward of daily duties. The scholar, the man of science, attains truth, not in a day, but slowly, little by little, fact by fact. In the same way, day by day, act by act, we make our character, by which we shall stand judged before the master of all good work. Often enough men make such a bad botch of it that they have to begin all over again. The greatest truth taught by religion is the forgiveness of God, which erases the past and gives another chance. All of us have spoiled enough material, dulled enough tools, and made enough mistakes to teach us that life without charity is cruel and bitter. Goethe, a great Mason, said that talent may develop in solitude, but character is created in society. It is the fruit of fellowship. Genius may shine aloof and alone, like a star, but goodness is social, and it takes two men and God to make a brother. In the holy book which lies open on our altar, we read, "No man liveth unto himself, no man dieth unto himself." We are tied together, seeking that truth which none may learn for another, and none may learn alone. If evil men can drag us down, good men can lift us up. No one of us is strong enough not to need the companionship of good men in the consecration of great ideals. Here lies, perhaps, the deepest meaning and value of Masonry. It is a fellowship of men seeking goodness, and to yield ourselves to its influence, to be drawn into its spirit and quest as to be made better than ourselves. Amid such influences, each of us is making his master's piece. God is all the time refining, polishing, with strokes now tender, now terrible. That is the meaning of pain, sorrow, death. It is the chisel of the master cutting the rough stone. How hard the mallet strikes, but the stone becomes a pillar, an arch, perhaps an altar emblem. Him that overcometh, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. The masterpiece of life, at once the best service to man and the fairest offering to God, is a pure, faithful, heroic, beautiful character. Oh, the cedars of Lebanon grow at our door, and the quarry is sunk at our gate, and the ships out of Ophir, with golden ore, for our summoning mandate wait, and the word of a master mason may the house of our soul create. While the day hath light, let the light be used, for no man shall the night control. Or ever the silver cord be loosed, or broken the golden bowl, may we build King Solomon's temple in the true Masonic soul. Brothers and Builders, by Joseph Fort Newton, Chapter 7. The Right of Destitution. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library. Read by Kwame. Nothing in Freemasonry is more beautiful in form or more eloquent in meaning than the first degree. Its simplicity and dignity, its blend of solemnity and surprise, as well as its beauty of moral truth, mark it as a little masterpiece. Nowhere may one hope to find a nobler appeal to the native nobilities of man. What we get out of Freemasonry, as of anything else, depends upon our capacity and our response to its appeal. But it is hard to see how any man can receive the first degree and pass out of the lodge room quite the same man as when he entered it. What memories come back to us when we think of the time when we took our first step in Freemasonry? We had been led, perhaps, by the sly remarks of friends to expect some kind of horseplay, or the riding of a goat, but how different it was in reality. Instead of mere play acting, we discovered, by contrast, a ritual of religious faith and moral law, an allegory of life and a parable of those truths which lie at the foundations of manhood. Surely no man can ever forget that hour when, vaguely or clearly, the profound meaning of Freemasonry began slowly to unfold before his mind. The whole meaning of initiation, of course, is an analogy of the birth, awakening and growth of the soul, its discovery of the purpose of life and the nature of the world in which it is to be lived. The lodge is the world as it was thought to be in the olden time, with its square surface and canopy of sky, its dark north and its radiant east, its center an altar of obligation and prayer. The initiation, by the same token, is our advent from the darkness of prenatal gloom into the light of moral truth and spiritual faith, out of lonely isolation into a network of fellowships and relationships, out of a merely physical into a human and moral order. The cable tow, by which we may be detained or removed should we be unworthy or unwilling to advance, is like the cord which joins a child to its mother at birth. Nor is it removed until, by the act of assuming the obligations and fellowships of the moral life, a new, unseen tie is spun and woven in the heart, uniting us, henceforth, by an invisible bond, to the service of our race in its moral effort to build a world of fraternal goodwill. Such is the system of moral philosophy set forth in symbols to which the initiate is introduced, and in this light each emblem, each incident, should be interpreted. Thus Freemasonry gives a man at a time when it is most needed, if he be young, a noble, wise, time-tried scheme of thought and moral principle by which to read the meaning of the world and his duty in it. No man may hope to see it all at once, or once for all, and it is open to question whether any man lives long enough to think it through, for, like all simple things, it is deep and wonderful. In the actuality of the symbolism, a man in the first degree of Freemasonry, as in the last, accepts the human situation, enters a new environment, with a new body of motive and experience. In short, he assumes his real vocation in the world and vows to live by the highest standard of values. Like every other incident of initiation, it is in the light of the larger meanings of Freemasonry that we must interpret the rite of destitution. At a certain point in his progress, every man is asked for a token of a certain kind, to be laid up in the archives of the lodge as a memorial of his initiation. If he is duly and truly prepared, he finds himself unable to grant the request. Then, in one swift and searching moment, he realizes, perhaps for the first time in his life, what it means for a man to be actually destitute. For one impressive instant, in which many emotions mingle, he is made to feel the bewilderment, if not the humiliation, which besets one who is deprived of the physical necessities of life upon which, far more than we have been wont to admit, both the moral and social order depend. Then, by a surprise as sudden as before, and in a manner never to be forgotten, the lesson of the Golden Rule is taught, the duty of man to his fellow in dire need. It is not left to the imagination, since the initiate is actually put into the place of the man who asks his aid, making his duty more real and vivid. At first sight, it may seem to some that the lesson is marred by the limitations and qualifications which follow, but that is only seeming. Freemasons are under all the obligations of humanity, the most primary of which is to succor their fellow men in desperate plight. As Muhammad long ago said, the end of the world has come when man will not help man. But we are under special obligations to our brethren of the craft, as much by the promptings of our hearts as by the vows we have taken. Such a principle, so far from being narrow and selfish, has the endorsement of the Apostle Paul in his exhortations to the early Christian community. In the Epistle to the Ephesians, we read, "As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith." It is only another way of saying that charity begins at home, and for Masons, the home is the lodge. So, then, the destitute to which this rite refers, and whose distress the initiate is under vows to relieve, as his ability may permit, are a definite and specific class. They are not to be confused with those who are poverty-stricken by reason of criminal tendencies or inherent laziness. That is another problem, in the solution of which Masons will have their share and do their part, a very dark problem, too, which asks for both patience and wisdom. No, the needy which this rite requires that we aid are all poor, distressed, worthy Masons, their widows and orphans, that is, those who are destitute through no fault of their own, but as the result of untoward circumstance. They are those who, through accident, disease, or disaster, have become unable, however willing and eager, to meet their obligations. Such are deserving of charity in its true Masonic sense, not only in the form of financial relief but also in the form of companionship, sympathy, and love. If we are bidden to be on our guard against impostors, who would use Masonry for their own ends, where there is real need, our duty is limited only by our ability to help, without injury to those nearest to us. A church, if it be worthy of the name, opens its doors to all kinds and conditions of folk, rich and poor alike, the learned and the unlearned. But a lodge of Masons is different, alike in purpose and function. It is made up of picked men, selected from among many, and united for unique ends. No man ought to be allowed to enter the order unless he is equal to its demands, financially as well as mentally and morally, able to pay its fees and dues and to do his part in its work of relief. Yet no set of men, however intelligent and strong, are exempt from the vicissitudes and tragedies of life. Take, for example, Anthony Sayer, the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England. Towards the end of his life, he met with such reverses that he became Tyler of Old King's Arms Lodge, number 28, and it is recorded that he was assisted out of the box of this society. Such a misfortune, or something worse, may overtake any one of us, without warning or resource. Disasters of the most appalling kind befall men every day, leaving them broken and helpless. How often have we seen a noble and able man suddenly smitten down in mid-life, stripped not only of his savings but of his power to earn, as the result of some blow no mortal wit could avert. There he lies, shunted out of active life when most needed and most able and willing to serve. Life may any day turn ruffian and strike one of us such a blow, disaster following fast and following faster until we are at its mercy. It is to such experiences that the rite of destitution has reference, pledging us to aid as individuals and as lodges, and we have a right to be proud that our craft does not fail in the doing of good. It is rich in benevolence, and it knows how to hide its labors under the cover of secrecy, using its privacy to shield itself and those whom it aids. Yet we are very apt, especially in large lodges, or in the crowded solitude of great cities, to lose the personal touch, and let our charity fall to the level of a cold, distant almsgiving. When this is so, charity becomes a mere perfunctory obligation, and a lodge has been known to vote $10 for the relief of others and $50 for its own entertainment. There is a Russian story in which a poor man asked aid of another as poor as himself. "Brother, I have no money to give you, but let me give you my hand," was the reply. "Yes, give me your hand, for that, also, is a gift more needed than all others," said the first, and the two forlorn men clasped hands in a common need and pathos. There was more real charity in that scene than in many a munificent donation made from a sense of duty or pride. Indeed, we have so long linked charity with the giving of money that the word has well nigh lost its real meaning. In his sublime hymn in praise of charity, in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, St. Paul does not mention money at all, except to say, "And although I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing." Which implies that a man may give all the money he possesses and yet fail of that divine grace of charity. Money has its place and value, but it is not everything, much less the sum of our duty, and there are many things it cannot do. A great editor sent the following greeting at the New Year. "Here is hoping that in the new year there will be nothing the matter with you that money cannot cure." For the rest, the law and the prophets contain no word of better rule for the health of the soul than the adjuration, "Hope thou a little, fear not at all, and love as much as you can." Surely it was a good and wise wish, if we think of it, because the things which money cannot cure are the ills of the spirit, the sickness of the heart, and the dreary, dull pain of waiting for those who return no more. There are hungers which gold cannot satisfy, and blinding bereavements from which it offers no shelter. There are times when a hand laid upon the shoulder, in a friendly sort of way, is worth more than all the money on earth. Many a young man fails, or makes a bad mistake, for lack of a brotherly hand which might have held him up, or guided him into a wiser way. The rite of destitution, yes, indeed, but a man may have all the money he needs, and yet be destitute of faith, of hope, of courage, and it is our duty to share our faith and courage with him. To fulfill the obligations of this rite we must give not simply our money, but ourselves, as Lowell taught in The Vision of Sir Launfal, writing in the name of a great brother who, though he had neither home nor money, did more good to humanity than all of us put together, and who still haunts us like the dream of a man we want to be. The Holy Supper is kept indeed, in whatso we share with another's need, not that which we give, but what we share, for the gift without the giver is bare. Who bestows himself with his alms feeds three, himself, his hungering neighbor, and me. Brothers and Builders. By Joseph Fort Newton. Chapter 8. The Inn of Year's End. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library. Read by Kwame. Our ancient brethren were pilgrims as well as builders, and so are we. The idea of life as a journey runs all through the symbolism of Freemasonry, and to forget that truth is to lose half its beauty. Initiation itself is a journey from the west to the east in quest of that which was lost. The reason why a man becomes a master mason is that he may travel in foreign countries, work, and receive the wages of a master. What is symbolism with us was the actual life of masons in days of old. An apprentice presented his masterpiece, and if it was approved, he was made a master and fellow. He could then take his kit of tools and journey wherever his work called him, a Freemason, free, that is, as distinguished from a guild mason, who was not allowed to work beyond the limits of his city.